It might sound like amplified exceptionalism to this point, but even if the globalist reset is successful in every other nation on earth, the globalists, the New World Order, are still failures if they cannot secure and subjugate the global population. As I have noted many times in the past, most of the world has been sufficiently disarmed, and even though we are seeing resistance in multiple European countries against forced vaccination legislation, medical tyranny, and economic poverty, it is unlikely that they will have the ability to actually repel a full-on march into totalitarianism. Most of Asia, India, and Australia are already well under control. Africa is almost an afterthought, considering Africa is where many suspected vaccines are tested.
We need a great reset of capitalism. Those were the words of Klaus Schwab, the founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum earlier this summer. In an article published on the World Economic Forum's website, he went on to say how it would work and the outcome. Clearly a big job, but it would require every country to be involved. And within those individual economic units that would have to work together, each and every sector would have to participate. Is this possible? And what are the likely outcomes?
The New World Economic Forum, or the New World Order Globalists, represents the Agenda 2030 and its applications throughout, thus involves creating a new globalist reset. The free people of the world, or the resistance, or the conservatives in particular, have been a thorn in the side of the globalists for generations, and it really comes down to a simple matter of mutual exclusion. You cannot have an openly globalist society and conservative ideals at the same time in the same place. It is impossible. The free people believe in a just government, true free markets, individual liberty, the value of life, freedom of speech, private property rights, the right to self-defense, the right to self-determination, freedom of religion, and the non-aggression principles. We won't harm unless you try to harm us. None of these ideals can exist in a globalist world, because globalism is at its core is the pursuit of a fully centralized tyrannical government, a one world government. There are people on this planet that are not satisfied to merely live their lives, take care of their families, and make their mark peacefully. They crave power over all else. They desperately want control over you, over me, over everything, and they will use any means at their disposal to get it. I would compare it to a kind of a drug addiction. Globalists are like crack addicts. They can never get enough power. There is always something more to take. They tell themselves and others that they are philanthropists, that they know what is best for the rest of us. They believe themselves superior, and therefore it is their destiny to dictate and micromanage society for the greater good of us all. But really, when we witness their methods, it becomes clear that they have no noble aspirations, they have no empathy or honor, they don't care about the average human being or the environment or the economy or society in general. They only care about themselves and capitalism and the delusions of grandeur. These people, the Illuminati, are a cancer upon the rest of civilization and the world. They seem to be particularly obsessed with deconstructing and sabotaging underdeveloped countries and economies in the pursuit of their global reset. Real philanthropists would not have a problem if someone didn't want to accept their charity, but psychopaths cannot abide a group of people rejecting them and their ideology. You are not allowed to walk away from them. You are not allowed to do things your own way. You must be forced to comply. The agenda only works if everyone submits. Unfortunately for the globalists, the reset is not working out for them. Everywhere in the US, the agenda is failing miserably compared to Asia and parts of Europe. As the head of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab is so fond of reminding us the COVID-19 pandemic is the perfect opportunity to push forward the globalist plans for a total reset of human economy and society. To the globalists, the crisis is a panacea, a doorway to their version of a better world, or their aim is to fulfill the 2030 Agenda or Agenda 2030. They love the pandemic, they are not distressed by it. The problem is it's not doing enough damage or terrifying enough people.
There are pockets, and significant pockets, of the country where vaccines aren't happening because of those, the anti-vaxxers, or whatever you want to call them, who have made significant headway in trying to convince parents they shouldn't vaccinate children. I was just looking at new data today from Orange County, California, with more than a few schools showing between 40 and 60% children not vaccinated.
You could say we're a victim of success. In the countries where you have measles all the time, nobody gets confused about this.
Do you get mad about it?
I get more mad about the deaths we're not avoiding. I spend my time on the countries where you still have, in the case of measles, over 300,000 kids dying a year. In the case of diarrheal diseases, over 1 million a year. There's 6 million kids a year still dying. Why aren't we getting vaccines out in Africa for diarrhea, for respiratory disease? Why don't we have a vaccine for malaria? Those are the things that I push forward. I wouldn't say I get angry, but I'm really impatient that we're not moving as fast as I'd like.
Consider the event 201 Coronavirus Pandemic Simulation. It was held by the World Economic Forum and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation only 2 months before the real thing coincidentally happened in early 2020. The pandemic war game was less about saving lives and more about how the elites plan to keep the public under control. The suppression of alternative media and censorship in social media was discussed at great length. Dissenting voices need to be silenced if the reset is going to prevail. One factor within the Event 201 simulation that never played out, though, was the WEF projections on deaths. The war game suggested at least 65 million initial deaths due to the pandemic. Early projections on the death rate suggested 2% to 3% of the population or more. The same projections were repeated by the UN's World Health Organization when the real pandemic was first revealed to the public. Instead, COVID-19 has been a letdown in the US for the globalists, with a tiny death rate of around 0.26% outside of nursing homes, meaning 99.7% of the population has nothing to worry about from COVID. Millions of people are becoming savvy to the situation and are refusing to comply with mandates over a virus that is a non-threat. Instead of backing off the reset scheme, the globalists are continuing to double down. Why? Because they have no other choice. They let the cat out of the bag, and bloviating big mouths like Klaus Schwab told the world exactly what the plan is. If they retreat now, they might never get another chance to implement a world centralization plan, a massive gift which requires medical tyranny in order to prevent rebellion. You see, if the death rate had been dramatically higher than 0.26% and COVID represented a legitimate threat, then maybe a larger portion of the US population would have been on board with longer term restrictions and medical passports. Maybe not. The fact remains that 40% of deaths have been in nursing homes among patients with pre-existing illnesses. The death rate outside of these facilities is minimal. The mask mandates have been proven completely ineffective, and the states that have remained open and removed mask mandates have falling death and infection rates when compared to states that are enforcing lockdowns. The fear narrative is falling apart. States across the US are opening and are refusing to implement useless mandates. In the US, legislators and the governors are passing laws that forbid the enforcement of medical passports. Even major corporations are not allowed to demand vaccine passports from customers or employees. Although this law is becoming known, and yet corporations are demanding legislative measures to be put in place and the issuing of vaccine passports permitted. On top of that, 40% to 50% of the US population in polls are refusing to comply with a vaccine rollout or medical passports. which take a vaccine for a virus that 99.7% of the population is unaffected by anyway.
I think anyone who's at risk should be quarantined until the storm passes.
All right, but this storm is coming again. You know, you're talking a lot about saving humanity, but these are humans that die in the process.
Everybody dies.
I know that, Elon. I get that. Will you get a vaccine? What do you do with your own family? You won't get a vaccine. Why is that?
I'm not at risk for COVID, nor my kid.
Mm-hmm. So you won't do that?
No.
The jig is up. The globalists are going to need another crisis if they hope to enforce further lockdowns throughout the world, along with medical passports and disarmament. Do not be surprised if there is more engineered chaos going into the summer months. But what will the next crisis look like? I think we are already seeing the signs. The mainstream media is pushing a non-stop narrative of COVID mutation hype. We hear about UK and Brazilian variants on a weekly basis, and the assertion has been that surely these variants will be more infectious and more deadly than the original virus. There is still no proof whatsoever to confirm this, but the globalists, the Illuminati, only care about planting the idea in people's heads. They only care about reigniting the fear and creating anarchy. This strategy is doomed to fail. Too many people are aware of the con game, and the new virus threat is not going to have the same effect as COVID-19 did in the early months of the pandemic. None of us really knew what we were facing back then, and caution was a practical response. Today we know for a fact that COVID is not a concern for the vast majority of the public. Media attempts to amplify the threat. Knowingly this will be ineffective, but they will of course still try. Just as the Event 201 simulation of a coronavirus pandemic preceded the real thing by only 2 months, there are concerns that the next World Economic Forum simulation event will also be a precursor to another crisis. Cyber Polygon is a war game being held by the WEF this July, which is meant to simulate a major cyber attack on the global supply chain and the economic system. There has been endless discussions in the international media in the past year building up fears of cyber attacks by Russia, China, Iran, and even North Korea.
I think we all need to be worried about it. I can certainly say at Schwab, we take this very seriously in terms of what we're doing inside our own organization and with our systems, as I'm sure every other financial institution is. But I think I have no greater ability than anybody else to speculate on if it happens and when and how big it is. But I think there's a couple of factors to consider. To the point made by the guest this morning, whose soundbite we just heard, it does represent potentially something systemic that really kind of moves into the entire global financial system. But maybe just as important would be what it would do to psychology. And if you think back to 2008, yes, there were plenty of fundamental and bubble bursting reasons why we had the carnage that we did, why the market went down as much as it did, why the recession was as ugly as it was. But a lot of it was pure fear on the part of businesses and consumers and investors. And that can feed on itself too. And versus something, say, like a natural disaster that isn't necessarily going to instill that pervasive fear, I think a cyber attack would.
In terms of supply chain threats, I'm not sure exactly how a cyber attack could do much to disrupt global shipping, unless we are talking about another blockage in a major shipping route like the Suez Canal. But a successful attack on stock exchanges in places like Wall Street could be devastating. I suggest watching this event carefully, as it may be designed to precede a real cyber attack sometime this year. The media and the Biden administration are very busy trying to create tensions with Russia over Ukraine. There are renewed tensions between Iran and Israel and continued destabilization by the West in Syria, and a rising danger of confrontation with China over Taiwan. War could be the goal, or the goal could merely be economic conflict. After all, China has already been dumping dollars and US treasuries the past year, and it would not take much to cause damage to the dollar's world reserve status if China and Russia both diversified into a basket of currencies for global trade. Beyond that, there are many advantages for globalists in creating regional wars and drawing the world into pointless conflicts. For example, the threat of war could be used to institute a new draft, introduce new laws, demonize poor economies. What better way to keep the matrix guarded, in particular busy, and stop them from rebellion against the reset, than to draft them so they can die in a meaningless war overseas, or through a pandemic, or through religious hatred. There is also a narrative advantage to global tensions. When presented with a foreign threat, the UN or the New World Order are more likely to reject notions of rebellion against government trespasses until they are removed from the equation. They will continue to throw crisis after crisis at us in order to wear us down and for us to accept totalitarianism.